Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 4:06, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Aaron Sibarium from the Washington Free Beacon, as there's an effort in Pennsylvania to register suicidal and psychotic patients at mental hospitals. Wonder who they're supposed to vote for. Oh, my goodness. The Free Beacon's Aaron Sibarium joins us this hour. And then Brent Bazell will be with us at 5 o'clock from the Media Research Center with some coverage of the press's reaction to Tim Walz's addition to the crazy Kamala ballot today. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Imagine being a Republican communications operative today and finding out the news, oh yeah, Kamala chose Tim Walz. Really? Well, this is a gold mine. They've got endless sources of audio and information about this guy and his radicalism. I'll give you some examples here, and I guarantee you we're barely scratching the surface on who this fella is. So, for instance, you may have heard this one by now. This is him declaring that socialism is actually kind of wonderful. It's just neighborliness.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case, and for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
That's right. This is the folksy centrist who they just added to the ticket. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. He's a big fan of the commies, actually, and he's concerned that you may not be. And he wants you to get back in line and say that Red China, well, they're kind of great.
I lived in China, and as I said, I've been there about 30 times, but if someone tells you they're an expert on China, they're probably not telling you the truth because it's a complex country. But it's critically important for us. I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship.
Yeah, that'll really help the American heartland. Manufacturing destroyed as we've been selling out Americans to China, the commies over there. And that's Tim Walz now on a major presidential ticket saying that China, not an adversary. So in case you're wondering, does he have his head on his shoulders? The answer is no. What else? Who else is he said he'd been to China 30 times. Have you been to China 30 times? That's a lot of times to go to China. I wonder what his social credit score is when he's in China. It's probably very high. He's doing great. Who else has gone to communist countries? Oh, that's right, Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, the guy who honeymooned in the Soviet Union. He said just weeks ago that he thinks that this Tim Walz character is fantastic.
See as being the presidential
Well, I'm not going to get
vice-president.
involved in making a choice. What I will say, though, is I've been impressed by Tim Walz's ability not only to communicate to the working people of Minnesota, but to also be an advocate for them. So I like Tim very much, and I wish him the best.
You think he'd fit the bill?
I think he could be a great vice president, yes.
He'd be very good for the vice president. Yes. I love him. And he's a socialist like me. And he's going to be very good, very folksy, very centrist. Bernie Sanders has given him the seal of approval. What does that tell you? AOC, Ilhan Omar, they're all super excited about this guy. He is he's great. He's just great. What else has he done? Well, he's introduced some Soviet policies of his own. Remember, he shut down his whole state during COVID and defended the fact that he destroyed the ability of students to learn in his state.
You have done the schools any differently? Because I think that's where a lot of parents are upset about what happened with the schools.
Well,
do you think you could have made any other choice?
Well, I think, just to be clear, over 80% of our students miss less than 10 days of in-class learning. The vast majority of students were in. It depended, again, on population density. Many of these decisions were being made by local folks to be able to do what was necessary to keep them there.
That's right. Stop crying about the fact that you're not in the schools. We're doing this to protect you. Of course, they weren't doing any such thing. In fact, it only made outcomes even worse for all of the kids and families who were affected by that. So that's Tim Walz. He is. I shared with you already that he let Minneapolis burn for days on end. The 3rd Precinct, the police, burned to the ground in Minneapolis, and finally, after that, he deploys the National Guard. He says, "Okay, fine, I guess I will." But he breathed life into all of this. He had, Kamala Harris's views on wokeism. Kamala's a big believer in being woke, remember?
You know, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, amidst all that cackling, Kamala came to the realization that Tim Walz is the wokest she could possibly pick. Here he is visiting the so-called George Floyd Memorial.
The anxiety people are feeling when nighttime falls, they're really nervous about that. Well, that's the anxiety people feel driving black. That's the anxiety that's there all the time. And I think maybe for the first time, people are starting to put those two things together, that daily life just existing is hellish anxiety because you're existing black. And I get it as a white man who's walked through with life's pretty damn easy, that the one thing is being able to open those doors.
What the hell is he talking about? First of all, the people whose lives were most destroyed by all of this rioting were black people in Minneapolis and across the country in these dense urban areas that were getting wrecked by the left. What is he talking about? This is obviously completely senseless. Here's Walz being like, oh, maybe for the first time in their lives, they're realizing what it's like to be black. They are black. You're the one who's crushing them by not protecting them. So that's Tim Walz, Mr. Woke, as Kamala Harris brings him on board to her campaign. And it just continues. Who else? Tim Walz, lieutenant governor, is also a psychopath. Her name is Peggy Flanagan. And she's for transing the kids. She thinks that genital mutilation is a perfectly excellent practice. In fact, you're not a good parent unless you do it.
Because let's be clear, this is life-affirming and life-saving healthcare. When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them. That's what it means to be a good parent.
Yeah, of course. Being a good parent is, surrendering and not doing anything to raise your kids. Just let them grow up to be feral. Just that they can do anything they want. Literally just, they bought an entire carton of cigarettes? That's good. Let them smoke it. What is she talking about? Of course, what she's talking about is Marxism applied. It's just utter chaos, and it's destructive to the kids, and that's, of course, the point to all of this. On that issue, on the transgender garbage, the absolute garbage, this guy Tim Walz is as radical as you can possibly get on this subject. He has made his state into a sanctuary for child mutilation. Let me go back to March of 2023. This is a headline from the Associated Press. Minnesota governor protects rights to gender-affirming care. And once again, this is a euphemism. When you hear the phrase gender-affirming care, this is allowing the destruction of a body. It's body negativity. It's hurting a child in their state. Governor Tim Walz, here's the piece from the AP. Governor Tim Walz signed an executive order Wednesday protecting the rights of LGBTQ people from Minnesota and other states to receive gender-affirming health care as he slammed the tide of other states rolling back transgender rights. Okay, let me untangle that absolute dumpster fire of a sentence. The issue is about so-called transgender rights. If that's where you're going to start, it has nothing to do with LGB or Q. So what are you talking about when you say LGBTQ people? 4 of those 5 letters have nothing to do with what Tim Walz did by way of that executive order. And so long as you're focused on the T, once again, it's not gender-affirming healthcare, it's gender-denying mutilation. It's not even healthcare. It's mutilation. And so the states that have been protecting kids are doing it right. The states like Minnesota, Governor Tim Walz, what he's been doing is absolutely destroying the lives of the children that state gets its hands on. Walz said this, quote, "We want every Minnesotan to grow up feeling safe, valued, protected, celebrated, and free to exist as their, quote, authentic versions of themselves." It's not true either. That's inauthentic, what they're doing. They're saying that your body is a mistake to these children. He goes on, "Protecting and supporting access to gender-affirming health care is essential to being a welcoming and supportive state." It's awful. It's enabling and it's destructive. Advocates for LGBTQ rights say that Republican-led states across the country are trying to erase the legal existence of people who are trans and to restrict the expression of those who are non-binary, gender fluid, or who perform in drag. And then they go on to quote the Human Rights Campaign, which has become a big gender genital mutilation operation. And they're bragging about how they're going after states like South Dakota, where Governor Kristi Noem signed a ban on gender-affirming care for minors last month, they claim. Quote, I don't know what a group of people in Pierre who decide to make life miserable and more dangerous for people are thinking, but it's not going to happen in Minnesota, Walz said, to applause from a room full of LGBTQ activists and their supporters. Walz's executive order parallels legislation awaiting a floor vote in the state house to make Minnesota a, quote, trans refugee state by protecting, quote, trans people, families, and care providers. That would be the big pharmaceutical companies, the big medical companies who are making a killing, in some cases literally, from the genital mutilation of children and adults for that matter, and from pumping them full of chemicals. That's who he actually represents. By protecting all of these organizations from legal repercussions for doing what they do, for traveling to Minnesota, they say, for gender-affirming care, which includes a wide range of social and medical interventions. While sponsors said they're optimistic about passage in the coming weeks, the governor said the accelerating trends among trans rights in other states made it urgent for him to impose protections immediately. The bill is authored by Democrat Representative Leigh Fink of St. Paul, Minnesota's first openly transgender legislator. It would prohibit the state from enforcing court orders or child protection laws from other states if they interfere with a person's right to seek gender-affirming care in Minnesota. Okay, once again, just to untangle the Orwellian world in which we live. First of all, this is a man pretending to be a woman who authored this legislation, declaring that he is a woman. And he and the governor go on to claim that other states who are trying to protect children, child protection laws, are basically null and void. They're going to give amnesty to the people who mutilate these kids from those other states who have laws designed to protect kids from these things. Oh, yeah, we'll do the vile thing here, and that'll be allowed. That'll be totally legal. So it's amnesty for them. Amnesty for the people who destroy the lives of these kids. So that's what this guy Tim Walz supports. He's not in any way a centrist. Additionally, in December of last year, Governor Walz signed into law in Minnesota a law that requires public schools in the state to stock menstrual products in all girls' and boys' bathrooms at no charge to students beginning January 1st of this year. Local reporting from Minnesota, the Patch website, Minnesota schools must stock all boys' and girls' bathrooms with tampons January 1st. The products, which include pads and tampons, must be available in restrooms regularly used by students in grades 4 to 12. The state will supply the funding for the tampons with $2 times the adjusted pupil units of the school district for the school year, the law states. In other words, once again, they're putting tampons in boys' rooms in Minnesota. Because this guy is a left-wing Marxist lunatic. Folksy and centrist is what they're telling us today. Folksy and centrist. Okay, to the phones we go. Sam is calling in from Alexandria, line 6. Sam, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Gallané Show.
Hey, thanks so much, Vince, and welcome back. Corey did an outstanding job.
Excellent news. I love that. I listened in a bit. It was great. I'm so happy that he did that.
Yeah, and I'm sure he had quite a good time. So, my comment today is it all goes back to education, and we can't assume that people understand, and it really needs to go back to common sense when we talk about examples, whether it's talking about Marxism, whether we're talking about, the gender issue and so forth.
Yeah.
Because I think when you made the comment about feral kids, everybody immediately knows what that means because they've been in the store, they've been in that restaurant, and they understand that. And, we bring it up in that respect and we say, well, how many people have put that cape on and said, "Mommy, I'm going to go up on the roof and jump off because Superman did it." Oh well.
I mean, if you,
a lot of people, especially.
You're totally right, Sam. It's an excellent example, and the point I'm making is, if you ask any parent, would you let your child raise themselves, or do you think that you have responsibility for that? The answer to that is crystal clear. It is crystal clear, and what the left has done is they've tried to actually erase the answer to that question and suggest that parents don't actually have a role, that everything is just self-actualization, that the kid comes out and they're like, I feel like this, and you can't question it at all. You have to obey them like they're the government, and the kid gets to dictate everything. That's how you destroy a child.
Yeah, not only that, you have to support, and may I use the word affirm, that as opposed to being, as we've heard, the adult in the room, and have a conversation and have that, no, you are not doing this, or no, you are not doing that. But, you know, there's a sizable population, we'll look at Minnesota, that elected this guy and that lieutenant governor with those positions. So sadly, there are enough people that can be swayed to say, well, you know, it makes sense to me why we should be affirming our children.
I know.
No, we don't.
And the only way they advance it is they tell you that the destructive thing is the decent thing, and you have to support it. And they govern with fear to enforce it. So the media, of course, I literally had to translate an Associated Press piece just now because it didn't actually tell you the truth about what was going on. It deceived you in advancing the lie. And my guess is that the AP reporter who wrote it actually believes they're on the side of decency. Meanwhile, there are actual American lives that are being left in the street and destroyed by this, Sam. Sam, thank you. Sam, always such a good call, sir. I appreciate that. All right, coming up, speaking of people whose lives are just all over the place, upended right now, we're going to talk to Aaron Sibarium about an effort in Pennsylvania to lead a voter registration drive among suicidal and psychotic patients in a mental hospital there, at least one. Aaron Sibarium will give us the details on that and who's really behind it. Hey, good afternoon to you. Now 4:35 News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up top of the hour from the Media Research Center, Brent Bozell is here. He'll give us his take on how the media are reacting to the inclusion of radical Tim Walz to that Kamala Harris campaign. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I love medical doctors, although sometimes when you go and you sit down for an appointment, they start talking about things that aren't health, and you're like, hey, can we get back on topic? I don't really want to talk politics with you. Well, what if your doctor tried to register you to vote while you were sitting there? What if, let me take it a step further, what if you were a psychotic person and your doctor said, you know what we should do right now? We should register you to vote. Well, it turns out that's apparently happening, at least in Pennsylvania. Joining us now with the details, Aaron Sibarium is a reporter for the excellent Washington Free Beacon, and he joins us on the phone. Aaron, always good to talk to you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so what is happening in Pennsylvania? I've seen a lot of headlines about voter registration there. Republicans are actually doing quite well this cycle, but is there an effort going on inside the hospitals to change that?
Well, there is a heavily Democratic nonprofit called Vot-ER that has doctors register their patients in clinical settings. And one of the institutions that this group has partnered with is the Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute. And at the Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute's inpatient clinic, so this is for people who need around-the-clock supervision because they're too mentally ill to be on by themselves since they're a danger to themselves or others. They are handing out basically materials that people can use to register to vote, and going up and asking pretty much everyone, it seems like, whether they would like to register to vote. And we know this because the initiative started all the way back in 2020, and the people who did it very helpfully wrote a an academic paper in which they just explained what they did. And the paper explains that there were absolutely no restrictions on which inpatients were eligible for these so-called voter support activities. So, and it also told us that the clinic had a number of patients who were involuntarily committed and had psychotic disorders. That's an exact quote from the paper. So just by in their own telling, we know that they are apparently registering psychotic patients in a mental institution to vote.
Okay, if you're involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility, that means you can't make decisions about yourself. How can you make decisions about our country?
That is a great question to which I did not receive a reply when I posed it to multiple people at this institute in an email. But look, I mean, you know, maybe there's some mitigating context here, but from what I can tell, yeah, these are folks who maybe they're not all they don't all have the same conditions, but at least some of them really are the kind of people who are there, as you say, precisely because they are not capable of being there on their own. So people who are not mentally healthy enough to make decisions about their own lives are nonetheless being asked to make decisions about the health of the entire nation.
Can I just point out an inconvenience that's associated with this? And then I want to dig into who these people are who are behind this initiative. But, like, when you go see a doctor, their time is pretty valuable. It's like kind of limited. You only get, in some cases, you only get a few short minutes with the actual doctor to talk about whatever your medical condition is. How is it that they're wasting time on voter registration conversations in these examination rooms?
Yeah, well, I mean, so one thing that's worth emphasizing here is that they've done this in emergency rooms, and they've done this in the NICU to the parents of infants who are in critical condition. And again, they brag about all this. It's not hidden. They put this on their website. So yeah, that really I think is a concern because you have them doing it in settings of medical emergency, right, where time is of the essence and where doctors are overworked. So, yeah, you know, if I were in there, I don't know, if I were there and I had something wrong with me, I would really want my doctor's undivided attention on my health and not on my voter registration status.
I know. Just imagine the procedures at these hospitals, though. It's like you got to make sure to wash your hands, you have to sterilize your equipment, and you have to hand them a voter registration form. That's how you deal with these patients. Yeah. So who's behind this? You told me it's called Vot-ER. What more do we know about this group?
Well, so it was founded by a former Kamala Harris staffer named Alistair Martin, who is an emergency room physician at Harvard Medical School. He was in the White House's Office of Public Engagement from 2021 to 2022. The rest of the group, I would say, it's from what we can tell, it's all very progressive people, even though the group says it's nonpartisan. A lot of them have cut checks to prominent Democrats. Many of them have terms like anti-racism and intersectionality and diversity and inclusion in their bios. And perhaps most tellingly, the group is clearly targeting traditionally Democratic constituencies because they have an application for...
Like the mentally ill?
Well, no, I mean, so what they do is they have them too, but they have an application for clinics that basically want grants from the hospital to integrate the voter registration materials into their healthcare delivery, and that application asks, are the majority of your patients Black, African American, Hispanic, LGBTQIA+, et cetera, et cetera. Not every demographic listed is equally Democratic leaning, but the majority, and 24 years and younger, right? 24 years old and younger. But a lot of them are. A lot of the ones they're asking about. So you know, why would you now granted, maybe they genuinely believe those people are in some way underrepresented, and so it's important to prioritize them. Okay. But still, you are asking for demographic info about a clinic's patients. You wouldn't ask that on the application unless you intended to use that information to decide how to allocate your resources. So it seems pretty clear, and by their own data indicates that their clinics are ones that predominantly serve African Americans, Hispanics. So like clearly they are disproportionately focused on registering voters who do, statistically speaking, vote Democrat more often than they vote Republican.
So how is this not? So I assume these medical centers, these facilities, just like almost every medical facility in the entire country, receives federal money. That as a part of their operations revenues, they're actually receiving federal money. Doesn't this violate federal law to be involved in what is pretty obviously a Democrat get-out-the-vote scheme?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, depending on your point of view, it doesn't obviously violate federal law because federal law actually does let healthcare centers do voter registration. So as long as you say that you're nonpartisan and don't endorse a particular candidate,
sure,
you're in the clear. Now, of course, right, the problem is that it's very easy to put your thumb on the scale in very subtle ways where you say, well, you should vote for, we're not telling you how to vote, but you should register to vote because the power structures of society are influenced by your vote, and it's important to get the terrible pollution out of the air. You're not telling them to vote for Democrats, but anyone with the vaguest political awareness will kind of hear that language and know, hint, hint, who's the party that this doctor thinks is going to do that. And so, right, this is the problem. There's a kind of, they have just enough plausible deniability that they most of this really probably is not illegal.
Yes.
But it clearly is going to have the effect of pushing a partisan agenda.
Well, it's obvious to anybody with two eyes and two brain cells to rub together what's happening here. And the other piece is that we have entire categories of federal law that measure things based on disparate impact. I mean, in fact, the Civil Rights Act was kind of built around that theory. And like, they drew a voting district in such a way that it diminished the power of black voters.
Yeah.
That obviously is, you don't even need any sort of explicit declaration that was the point. And of course, then the courts get involved. Here, it seems like nobody seems to care that this is a full-blown Democrat get-out-the-vote scheme being paid for with federal tax dollars, and a Kamala Harris lackey who is now registering mentally ill people to vote.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the disparate impact point is a really, really good one. I'm glad you brought it up because, right, like obviously it's common for people to say, well, okay, sure, this policy has, disparate impact, but the intent is not to do that, right? So it's not fair for you to call us racist or whatever. But like we've decided as a country, maybe we shouldn't have, but the law of the country is that, in fact, when things have disparate impact, that can be grounds for corrective action. And so if you accept that principle, it's hard to see why it wouldn't apply here philosophically. I guess the principle
just be consistent
when it helps Democrats, but not, or when it doesn't. I don't know.
That's wild. So in your coverage of this, of what's going on in Pennsylvania, clearly this is a state that Democrats are really concerned about. The evidence is definitely demonstrating that there's a lot of Republicans who are being registered to vote in that state, which I think is very good news. To what extent do you think Democrats are going to be able to make up this ground with efforts like this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so look, obviously the Psych Institute itself, that's only like 50, 60 votes. That's not going to determine it.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
But when you look in the aggregate, this group says that I'm not sure if it's that they've registered 89,000 people to vote, but they've I think 89,000 people have either checked their polling location or their registration status or registered to vote. So like we're talking tens of thousands of people who have been registered to vote through this organization across the United States. And because of the way the Electoral College works, depending on how, say, 50,000 people are distributed across swing states, that can, in principle, make a difference. So, and this group does brag about how they they disproportionately turn out African American. The badges are disproportionately used by clinics that are predominantly African American, and not all of them, but a lot of the places they partner with, I think, are in urban areas that are going to lean blue. So, yeah, like in principle, on its own, would it be enough to swing the election? Probably not, but it's not trivial. I mean, it's not like it's just, it's not like the stakes of this are 200 votes. Like, the stakes of this are tens of thousands of votes. And so, yeah, in Pennsylvania, look, I mean, it wouldn't be nothing. It is not an insignificant factor.
Two last points. One, you said that this organization, Vot-ER, which once again we're talking to Aaron Sibarium and about a former Kamala Harris staffer who runs this organization. They're registering people to vote even inside of mental hospitals, having doctors do that. One of the things you report is that they have scripts for these doctors to convince their illegal alien patients to get their friends and family registered to vote?
Yeah, basically what they do is they say, well, generally in the U.S. citizens can't vote, but, you can, non-citizens can't vote.
Right.
But, what you can do is you can show this badge. This is how it works. There's a badge and the QR code that people can scan. And they take a picture of my badge and then show the picture to your documented friends and family, and then they can scan it and register to vote. So, yes, they are explicitly focusing on registering not illegal immigrants themselves, but the families of illegal immigrants who
Sure. Yeah, once the illegals handling it, it's not their business anymore, right? So anything could happen. The other piece here is that you spoke with people who deal in the realm of psychiatry, and you asked them what they thought of the ethics of all of this idea that you would take somebody who is suicidal or schizophrenic or isn't voluntarily admitted to these mental hospitals. What do experts in psychiatry think of this practice?
Well, at least some of them told me that they think it's deeply unethical, or at least that it raises serious ethical concerns. Especially, right, it would be one thing if this were only done to patients who were about to be discharged and thus, almost by definition, had been stabilized enough to leave. Right there, you could say, okay, maybe it's not so bad, but that they explicitly say that they do it for patients, even if discharge is not upcoming. So yeah, I mean, I talked to a ethicist who literally ran the ethics center at NYU's medical center for 3 years, and she said, yeah, this raises some real worries. And the other point some other folks made is, look, these guys if you're there involuntarily, there's going to be an implicit element of coercion anytime your doctor asks you to do something, even if they just suggest it and say it's optional, because you might worry like that if you don't do it, that you're going to be there longer and it'll be deemed as non-compliant. And of course, even if that's not true, well, by definition, people in mental institutions are not in possession of their full faculties, and so like the very fact that you're bringing it up, even if you don't plan to adversely, affect their care in any way, they might think that their care will be adversely impacted.
Yes.
So that's itself a problem.
There's a cruelty to this, obviously, and they're taking advantage of people who are in a very difficult moment in their lives, and their doctors, rather than healing them, are taking advantage of them on behalf of the left, which is grotesque, clearly. Aaron Sibarium, thank you for covering it from the Washington Free Beacon. Always good to talk to you, sir. All right, let's see here. I've got line 4, Michael, calling in from Woodbridge. Michael, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Colonnade Show.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
So listening to the interview, which was a great interview and insightful, and I'm sure there's more shenanigans like this going on, it reminded me of what Rush Limbaugh used to say all the time, is that liberalism
Isn't that the
who
way it
better
is?
qualified?
Isn't that the way it is? Michael, I'm sorry. My phone just disrupted when you were trying to stick the landing. What did Rush always say? Repeat that for me.
Liberalism is a mental disease.
Perfect. Go ahead. Continue your point.
Oh, well, who better qualified than a psychiatric doctor to determine if a person's a liberal or not?
That's right.
You know, and if they have a mental disorder, you know, perhaps they would be inclined to vote and agree with liberalism.
Yeah, instantly using it as a filtering mechanism. Hey, let's go to a psych ward and register people to vote. That might help us out, says the left. Yeah, that is, and of course they go in there and then they exploit these people who are in these crisis moments in their lives. Hey, you know what you'd be good for? No, not getting healed up. Voting for Kamala. Voting for Kamala. All right. Hey, joining us coming up just in mere minutes, we're going to be having the pleasure, as always, to speak with Brent Bazell, the head of the Media Research Center, about how demented our media are as they walk in lockstep to support Tim Walz, the radical left-wing running mate of an already radical Kamala Harris. That's ahead.